Chapter 11. A Midnight Message. "When shall we visit the cave?" George asked. "As soon as we can," Nancy answered. "Of course, we must help Jo and her grandmother with the work." Since there was no further evidence of activity on the hillside, the girls went to bed. The next morning, George remarked, as she helped Nancy make her bed, "What do you suppose those men do between ceremonials? It certainly is strange how much time they spend in that cave." "What puzzles me is those automobiles that were on the hillside," Bess said. "Why did they come? Surely those men were here for something besides ballet dancing. What's your guess, Nancy?" "I'm afraid I haven't any answer, but I mean to find one for Mrs. Byrd's and Jo's sakes." The three girls learned that Reuben was due to be absent most of the day and offered to do his chores. During the morning, they picked cherries and took them to town to sell at a local market. When they returned, a small, strange car was standing in the driveway. Loud voices were coming from the living room. "I don't have to sell, and I won't sell," Mrs. Byrd said with finality in her tone. "That's what you think," a man said sneeringly. "You're going to lose this farm and I can buy it cheaper from the bank. Why don't you sell it to me and make a little profit? Then you can go to the city and take life easy." "We don't want to go to the city," Joanne spoke up. "We're getting along all right here. More boarders are coming soon, and we are paying off our back mortgage interest, so we don't have to sell." Outside, Nancy, Bess, and George looked at one another. The insistent buyer again. Fervently, they hoped that Mrs. Byrd would not weaken in her decision. A moment later, they felt relieved. "I will say good afternoon, Mr. Kent," Mrs. Byrd said. "Thank you for your offer, but I cannot accept it." "You'll be sorry. You'll regret this," the caller stormed. He came out the screen door, slamming it viciously behind him. Nancy stared in surprise. Mr. Kent certainly was one of the most ill-mannered men she had ever seen. And also, she thought wryly, one of the most tenacious. Why was he so determined to buy the Byrd home? Mr. Kent, his face red with anger, stepped into his car and sped off, but not before he gave Nancy and her friends a baleful look. "Nice disposition," George commented sarcastically. "I hope he never shows up again," Bess said firmly. The girls found Mrs. Byrd and Joanne quite shaken. "I can't understand that man's persistence," the woman said. Nancy was sure the matter was tied in with the cult on the hillside, but did not mention this theory. She merely said, "Try not to worry about Mr. Kent. I doubt that he'll return." Soon the incident was forgotten, as preparations for supper were started and the farm animals were fed. George elected to take care of gathering eggs from the henhouse. Bess gave the horse hay and water. "I'll get the cow," Nancy offered, and went off toward the pasture to drive Primrose in. But the cow was not there. Nancy walked around the fence surrounding the field to see if there was any opening through which the animal might have wandered. Finally, she found one and saw hoofprints leading toward a patch of woods. Nancy dashed off among the trees. She had never been that way before, but there was only one path to follow. Several times she paused to listen and thought she heard the faint tinkling of a cowbell somewhere ahead of her. It was rapidly growing dusky in the woods, and Nancy hurried on. Again she stopped to listen. She could hear the cowbell distinctly now. Primrose can't be far ahead, she thought in relief, and went in that direction. Nancy finally caught sight of the Jersey contentedly munching grass on the hillside beyond. Nancy stopped short and gave a gasp of astonishment. The sound of the cowbell had brought her to the mouth of the cave. "I can hardly believe it," she almost exclaimed out loud. This must be the other opening near the nature camp Joe told me about. Eagerly, Nancy rushed toward the cave. But no sooner had she peered into the dark entrance than she was startled by the crackling of a twig behind her. Nancy wheeled to find a man standing not 3 feet away from her. He seemed to have risen from the bushes which half hid the opening of the cave. Instantly it flashed through Nancy's mind that he had been stationed there to see that intruders did not enter. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice as cold as steel. Nancy recoiled. The man stood in the shadows of the shrubbery so that she could not see his face distinctly. But at the sound of his voice, she knew instantly she was in danger. I must persuade him I wasn't spying, she thought desperately. "Better speak up," the man snarled. "What are you doing here, girlie?" "I was hunting for that cow," Nancy replied as casually as possible. She pointed to the Jersey, which was grazing a short distance away. She held her ground defiantly. There was a moment's silence. Nancy could feel that the man was staring at her, as if undecided whether or not to believe her. "So you were after the cow," the lookout growled. "Then why are you by this cave?" "Why, I was just wondering what was inside," Nancy said innocently. "Surely there's no harm in looking." "You've no business around here," the man snapped. "This property belongs to the members of the Black Snake Colony." "Oh!" Nancy exclaimed in pretended awe. "Then you must belong to the colony. How very interesting." The man made no response to Nancy's remark. Instead, he muttered, "Round up that old cow of yours and get out of here. And don't come trespassing again." Nancy knew she would gain nothing by arguing. Obediently, she overtook the cow and headed her back toward Redgate. The man watched until Nancy disappeared into the woods. As soon as she had started the cow down the path, however, Nancy quietly retraced her steps. She reached the edge of the woods just in time to catch a glimpse of the man entering the cave. "That proves he's one of the Black Snake group," she told herself. He was acting as a guard for them. For an instant, Nancy was tempted to follow, but common sense told her not to press her luck. The lookout seemed determined enough to make trouble for her if she took the chance. Reluctantly, the young sleuth turned back toward the farm. It was clear to Nancy that the entire business of the Black Snake group was anything but open and above board. Obviously, they were afraid that some of the country folk would attempt to investigate. When Nancy finally reached the barn and Joanne began to milk Primrose, the other girls plied their friend with questions. "We were beginning to worry," Joanne said in relief. "I wouldn't have let you go alone if I'd known this cow of ours would stray so far." "I'm glad I went," Nancy said quickly. She then told the others what had taken place near the mouth of the cave. They gasped in astonishment upon hearing of her encounter with the lookout. "Weren't you frightened when he sprang up out of nowhere?" Bess asked, giving Nancy an admiring glance. "I'd have fainted on the spot." "That's an easy way out if I ever heard one," Nancy commented with a laugh. "Girls don't faint these days," George scoffed. "Probably you'd have screamed and brought all the members down on you. They'd have dragged you off and put an end to you." "Thanks, George," Bess muttered. "You say the nicest things." "Well, girls, talk all you like," Nancy added, "but don't lose your nerve altogether. I still want to get a closer look at that cave." "Not tonight," Bess said firmly. Nancy smiled. "I hope there won't be a ritual on the hillside tonight. We've been too busy to get our costumes ready." The girls watched, but the distant landscape remained dark. Finally, they went to bed. Not long afterward, Nancy was roused from a fitful slumber by the stopping of a car not far from her window. She hopped from bed and went to peer out. A tall, slender woman who wore her hair piled high was walking to the front door. Nancy leaned out the window and called, "What is it you wish?" "Nancy Drew. Is she here?" "Yes, I'm Nancy." "I have a letter for you." Nancy did not recognize the woman's voice, but she might be disguising it. "From whom?" "Your father." "Why are you bringing it now?" "It's an urgent message," the strange woman said. "I'll leave it on the doorstep." She dropped the letter, hurried into the car, and the man at the wheel drove off. Heart pounding, Nancy put on her robe and slippers and hurried down to the front door. End of chapter 11.